The night I played that melody, every person in that room stopped breathing, not because my music was perfect, not because I was the most technically gifted violinist in Seoul, but because something ancient moved through those strings, something that did not belong to me. Something that had been sleeping inside that violin for longer than I had been alive, and when it woke up, the entire room felt it. I watched it happen the way you watch lightning strike. Fast, irreversible, impossible to look away from, a crystal glass stopped halfway to a painted mouth. A waiter froze mid-step, his tray tilting slightly, catching the light. Security men, large, professional, trained to feel nothing, stood with their hands loose at their sides and their eyes gone somewhere distant. Like the music had reached inside each person and pressed a finger against something they had buried long ago. Then I saw him. He was standing at the far end of the ballroom. And the moment the melody touched the air between us, something happened to his face that I do not have clean words for even now. His jaw released. His shoulders, which had been carrying the specific tension of a man who has been fighting something for a very long time, let go of whatever they were holding. And his eyes, which I would later learn had not shown feeling in front of another human being in over a decade, filled slowly with something that looked terrifyingly close to grief. His glass lowered. His lips parted. And then Park Siwon, the most feared crime lord in Seoul's underground world, the man they called *Gwison*, the ghost, whispered a name into the silence my music had created. I was across the room, the chandeliers were loud with light, the space between us was full of frozen, breathless people, but I read his lips. I had learned to read lips in Lagos markets as a child, watching traders negotiate when the noise was too violent to hear through. The name he whispered was Amara, my dead grandmother's name. A Nigerian woman who had never once set foot in South Korea, a woman buried beneath the red soil of Enugu State before I was old enough to remember her face. My bow kept moving. My hands were shaking, but the music did not show it. I had trained my hands to be steadier than the rest of me for exactly these kinds of moments. The moments when everything inside you is breaking and the world still requires you to perform. But my eyes stayed on him, and the question that entered my mind in that moment did not leave me for a very long time. How did Park Siwon know that name? And why did he say it like it was the only word left in the world that could still reach him? To understand why that name nearly stopped my heart, you have to understand where I came from. I grew up at St. Catherine's Children's Home in Seoul, Lagos, 47 children, 3 shared bathrooms, and a generator that ran all night because the city outside never went quiet. We did not have much. But Lagos itself was generous in its own loud, chaotic way. The market smelled of pepper and palm oil and something sweet I could never name. And the streets were so full of sound and color that loneliness had to fight hard to find you. It found me anyway. My parents died on the Ibadan Expressway when I was 4, a road accident on a Sunday morning. I remember almost nothing about them except one thing, a melody. My mother used to hum it when she rocked me to sleep. No words, just a melody that moved like water over smooth stones, quiet, patient. Ancient in a way that made no sense for a young woman in Lagos to carry, like it had come from somewhere far beyond her and was only passing through on its way to somewhere else. I found my father's old violin at the children's home when I was 7. It was tucked behind donated boxes in the storage room, cracked shoulder, strings gone brown with age. Sister Blessing said someone must have left it during a donation drop. Nobody knew whose it had been. When I plucked the first string, something happened in my chest that I had never felt before. A door opened. Something that had been asleep inside me sat up, turned its head, and paid full attention. I taught myself everything by listening. I memorized my mother's melody first, built it back from the ghost of a memory, note by careful note, the way you rebuild a burnt thing from its own ash. Then I began adding around it, expanding outward, always returning to the same foundation. By the time I was 19, a Korean-Nigerian cultural exchange program offered me a scholarship to study at the Seoul National University of Arts. 3 years of tuition, a dormitory room. A stipend that would barely cover meals. I said yes without sleeping on it. Orphans learn early that hesitation is a luxury. When a door opens, you walk through it and figure out the room later. Seoul was the most breathtaking and most isolating city I had ever seen, and I had seen loneliness in many different shapes. Seoul in February looked like something between a dream and a warning. The Han River ran half-frozen under gray sky, and the wind came down from the mountains and went straight through every layer you owned and settled in your bones like it had decided to stay. I wore everything I had on the subway from Incheon Airport and still arrived shivering. The university was prestigious, the students were serious. And I was the only black girl in every room I entered. I told myself it would not matter. I told myself music was a universal language. I said these things every morning the way some people say prayers, desperately and repeatedly, hoping that saying them enough would make them true. My first month, a professor stopped a masterclass to tell me, in front of everyone, that my technique had African emotionality but lacked discipline. He said it like emotional depth was a defect to be corrected, like feeling things fully was something to be ashamed of. I sat very still, I let the silence hold, then I played the next passage. But I stored that moment. I stored it the way you store things you cannot yet use but know you will need, filed away, waiting. Weekends I played in Hongdae on the pedestrian street where artists gathered. I played in Insadong near the tea houses. I played outside Gyeongbokgung Palace when tourists came thick as morning fog. I earned just enough to eat real meals. I learned to navigate a city that did not quite know what to do with me, and I learned to do it with my chin level. That was how Kim Junhee found me. She was standing at the edge of my Saturday crowd in Hongdae, wearing dark sunglasses and a coat that cost more than my monthly stipend. She waited until the crowd dispersed, then approached with the practiced efficiency of someone who arranged things for other people for a living. She told me she handled private entertainment for exclusive events. Her employer was hosting a charity gala at the Grand Hyatt Seoul that coming Friday. The original string quartet had canceled. She needed a replacement. She offered me a figure that made me count the zeros twice. Then she paused, the small, deliberate pause of someone choosing their next words carefully, and said something I would only understand the full weight of later. One thing, she said quietly. Watch out for yourself tonight. Not everyone in that room will be glad you are there. At the time I thought she meant because I was a foreign musician replacing a cancelled quartet. I smiled and told her I was used to rooms that were not glad I was there. She looked at me for a moment with something that might have been sadness. Then she gave me the event details and walked away. I should have asked more questions. I did not. The Grand Hyatt Ballroom on the 42nd floor was built for people who had never once worried about the cost of anything. Chandeliers like frozen waterfalls, marble floors the color of cream and old smoke, flowers arranged with the kind of deliberate artistry that makes beauty look effortless. The guests moved through it all like they belonged to the room, and the room had always belonged to them. I wore my one good dress, black, simple, pressed 3 times with a travel iron. My locks pulled into a careful updo, my violin case polished with the sleeve of my coat. When I came through the performer's entrance, the catering manager looked at me the way people sometimes looked at me in this city, like I was an error. Like my presence in this specific room was a clerical mistake that someone would shortly correct. I gave him my steadiest smile and asked where the warm-up room was. Kim Junhee handed me the evening's program backstage and reminded me, look at your music stand, not at the room. The host preferred not to be watched by performers. I asked who the host was. Her pause was half a second longer than it needed to be. Park Siwon, she said. He is a businessman. I had been in Seoul long enough to understand that particular hesitation. I had heard that name dropped in corridor whispers on campus, quickly, carefully, the way you put down something dangerously hot. I told myself I would play the program, take my fee, and be gone before midnight. I played the program, every piece precisely, professionally. And then between the final classical piece and the closing number, something happened that I still cannot fully explain. I closed my eyes. And instead of moving to the next page on my music stand, my bow found the melody, my mother's melody. The one with no written score, no title, no origin I could name, only the shape of it inside me, ancient and insistent as breathing. I do not know why it came in that moment. Only that it felt necessary, like the room required it, like the air had been waiting. The chandeliers seemed to dim, the room stopped. And across all that distance, Park Siwon whispered a dead woman's name. He did not approach me that night, but Kim Junhee found me the next morning with a new arrangement. Mr. Park wished to retain me as his personal musician for private occasions. The figure she named was enough to cover the rest of my education and then considerably more. I said yes. I told myself it was practical. I told myself I was not burning with questions about the name he had whispered. The first private session was at his penthouse in Cheongdam-dong, so high above Seoul that the city spread below like a circuit board lit from within, floor-to-ceiling glass on 3 sides. Furniture in charcoal and ivory, no personal photographs anywhere, no warmth anywhere, a space from which every soft thing had been methodically removed. Park Siwon sat in a chair with a whiskey glass and told me to play without looking at him. I played classical pieces first, then again without deciding to the melody. This time I was close enough to see everything. His eyes closed the instant the first note arrived. His breathing changed, not slower but different, the way a drowning man's breathing changes when he breaks the surface. His hand gripped the chair arm until the knuckles went white, then slowly released. When I finished, he was silent for a full 60 seconds. I counted everyone. Then, in careful formal English, "Where did you learn that piece?" "It is not a piece," I said. "It is a melody my mother hummed. She learned it from her mother. It has no name." Silence again. "What was your grandmother's name?" he asked. Something moved strangely behind my ribs. "Amara." "Why?" He looked at me then, the first time he had looked directly at me, and his eyes held my face the way a man holds a map when he is searching it for a landmark he was afraid no longer existed. "No reason," he said, and looked away. He booked me for 3 sessions per week after that. Over the following weeks, something I had not expected began to happen. The sessions changed shape. He stopped retreating to his study while I played. He moved his chair closer. Sometimes he asked for the melody twice. And I watched carefully, quietly, the way I had always watched, as his face went through those private seismic shifts he believed nobody could see. One evening he asked me about Nigeria. About Lagos, about the children's home and whether the streets were loud at night. I answered him honestly, and in his quality of listening I recognized something I knew in my own bones, the particular hunger of someone who has been starving for something real for a very long time. I asked him one evening whether he believed in past lives. He was quiet. Then, my grandmother was a shaman from South Gala province. She believed certain souls find each other across every lifetime because their unfinished business pulls them back together. She called it *inyon, a thread of fate that draws people even when they cannot see it. "Do you believe that?" I asked. His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "I believe in what I can control. And this," I said quietly before I could stop myself. "Can you control this?" He turned to look at me, long, searching. "No," he said finally. "I cannot," but I had forgotten Kim Jun-hee's quiet warning, and the world outside those private sessions had not forgotten me. One morning I woke to a message from a university friend, a screenshot from an online tabloid, a photograph of me entering Park Siwon's building. The caption called me his *foreign amusement. I had a translation app. I read the comments. I stopped after the first 15. Not because they stopped being cruel, but because I recognized the specific pain of them, the kind that goes for everything at once: your color, your country, your right to exist in a particular space, and I knew that reading more would not make me stronger. It would only make me smaller. I closed my phone, I picked up my bow, I played until my hands stopped shaking. What I did not know then was that the photograph had been deliberately fed to that publication, that the journalist who printed it was on a payroll that did not belong to Park Siwon, that the anonymous complaint sent to my university dean, which arrived that same week, threatening my enrollment, had been written by someone in the same building I performed in every week. Han Chi-alsu, Park Siwon's second in command. I had met him once in the lobby, a broad man in his 40s with a smile that was very wide and very empty. He had spoken to me in Korean, knowing I was still learning. I had understood enough. "Pretty bird, careful you don't fly too close to things that burn." I had taken it as a warning. It was an announcement. He had been building against Park Siwon for months, feeding Betrayal to a rival organization in Busan the way you feed a fire, steadily, patiently, one piece at a time. And he had decided that I was the most efficient instrument for destroying Park Siwon's focus. The foreign girl who had appeared from nowhere and somehow breached the walls of the most defended man in Seoul's underworld. He was not wrong about what I had breached. He was wrong about what that made me. Then came the evening that changed everything. I was in Park Siwon's study. He had stepped out for a phone call, and I wandered to the doorway and saw on the otherwise empty shelf a single framed photograph, old, black and white. A woman in a traditional Korean hanbok, high cheekbones, eyes shaped like almonds. Something in her expression that looked like waiting, like she had been caught mid-wait, looking toward something just beyond the camera's reach. The frame was turned slightly. On the back, handwritten in old ink, a date in Korean, and below it a name written in careful phonetic script. Amara. I stood completely still. My breath left me and did not immediately return. I carried that discovery alone for 3 days. I played the melody each session and watched his face differently now, with new understanding trying to arrange itself into a shape I could hold. Something was connecting across time, across oceans, across the border between lives, and I did not yet have language for it. On the 3rd day, he noticed the change in my playing. He said, "You are playing it differently." "I know something now," I said, "that I did not know before." He looked at me steadily. "The photograph." "Yes." He crossed to the shelf. "Picked up the frame the way you pick up something irreplaceable." His thumb moved once across the glass. "My grandmother believed," he said slowly, like each word was being chosen from great depth, "that in his previous life my grandfather loved a woman from West Africa, a musician. A woman who played an instrument with strings. He died before they could leave together, before they could finish what they had started." He paused. My grandmother said he came back. And she spent her entire life believing that the woman came back too, somewhere with the same melody waiting to be found. The room held us both. She wrote it down, I said. Your grandmother, the melody. His eyes found mine. In her journal, yes. I want to see it, I said. He reached into the inside pocket of his jacket. He had been carrying it. He had been carrying it with him the entire time. He held out a folded page, his grandmother's handwriting in Korean, and beside the Korean, a phonetic melody transcription. Imprecise the way a non-musician transcribes sound, but unmistakable, my mother's melody, written down by a woman who died before I was born. The night Han Chialsu made his move was a Thursday in October. 2 men in a black car were waiting outside the university gates. They showed credentials from a police department that, I would learn later, had 3 of its senior detectives quietly owned by Han Chialsu. They were polite about it. That is the sophisticated version of this kind of violence. They do not need to be loud. They drove me to a warehouse in Mapo. Han Chialsu was waiting with 3 men, a camera on a tripod, and the specific patience of someone who has rehearsed a scene many times in his head. He spoke to me in English, clearly. So nothing would be lost, he said. Tell the camera that Park Siwon discussed his operations with you. Buildings, accounts, names, do this and you go home tonight. Refuse and you simply disappear. And everyone will assume the sad little orphan from Nigeria could not survive Seoul. I looked at the camera, I looked at him. I thought about every room that had made me feel like I did not belong in it, every face that had told me without words that I was too much or not enough or simply wrong. I said, I have nothing to say to your camera. He sighed, he nodded. What came next lasted 4 minutes. I know this because there was a clock on the warehouse wall and my eyes went to it and stayed there, fixing on something solid while the rest of the world became unstable. They were professionals, careful in the way that leaves marks you cannot easily photograph. They were methodical and quiet and entirely without feeling about what they were doing. And then they brought my violin. Han Chialsu held it with both hands and looked at me, and I understood in that moment that this was not about information. This was about sending a message to Park Siwon in the language that would hurt him most, by destroying the thing that had reached him when nothing else could. He raised the violin above his knee. Don't, I said. The word came out very quiet, almost not a word at all. He brought it down. The sound of the wood cracking open was not loud. That was the worst part. I had expected something loud. Instead, it was a small, clean, intimate sound, like something giving up rather than being destroyed. The strings snapped inward, the neck separated from the body, the pieces fell. Something in my chest cracked open in the exact same rhythm. That violin was not just an instrument. It was my father's hands left behind after he died. It was my mother's melody, which I had first played on those brown, aged strings. It was every year of every pavement and every cold morning and every room that tried to tell me I did not belong. All of it survived because of those strings. All of it made bearable because of what I could create with that wood and that bow. He had not just broken a violin, he had broken the only home I had ever fully owned. I gathered every piece. Both guards told me to leave it. I did not leave it. I wrapped the fragments in my coat, every splinter, every coil of broken string, and I held the bundle against my chest like you hold something you are not ready to bury yet. Park Siwon arrived 40 minutes later. Kim Junhee had seen the car. She had followed at a distance. She had called him before I even understood what was happening, because she had been watching over me from the beginning, quietly from the sidelines. The way people watch over things they believe deserve protecting. He came into the room where they had moved me, a side office, a single light, a metal chair, and he stopped in the doorway. He looked at me. He looked at the bundle in my arms. He looked at the coat and the shape of what was inside it, and he understood immediately and completely what had been taken. His face did something I had never seen it do. Not fury, not coldness. Something far more dangerous, the expression of a man whose last defense against feeling has been deliberately and precisely destroyed. He crossed the room. He sat down on the floor beside my chair. Not in a chair, on the floor. Like all the architecture of his authority had simply ceased to be relevant. He put his face in his hands. Park Siwon, the ghost, sat on a warehouse floor in a suit that cost more than most people earned in a year. And the sound that came from behind his hands was the sound of a man paying a debt he had been carrying for a very long time. I am sorry, he said into his palms, 2 words. But spoken by a man who did not apologize, who had built 30 years of empire on the premise that acknowledging damage made you vulnerable. Those 2 words carried the weight of everything he had never allowed himself to say. Why did you come? I asked. My voice surprised me, steady, clear, like my body had decided to be calm so he did not have to be. He lifted his face. His eyes were red at the edges. He looked stripped of everything he usually wore between himself and the world. Because, he said, I have lost you before, I will not lose you again. I left Seoul 3 weeks later. Not because he sent me away, not because I wanted to leave, but because the university had suspended my enrollment pending investigation of the complaint Han Cheol-soo had filed before his arrest. And because Park Siwon, who was dismantling the betrayal inside his organization with the same precision and coldness he applied to everything, except, it turned out, needed me somewhere safe while the wreckage was cleared. He arranged a flat in Lagos overlooking a courtyard, security that was invisible but present. A new violin, not to replace my mother's, which he had already placed in the hands of the finest instrument restorer in Seoul, but to ensure my hands stayed warm while they waited. At the airport, he walked me to the terminal boundary, as far as he could go. We stood at the edge of the public world and the private one, departure hall noise all around us, ordinary lives flowing past in both directions, indifferent to everything we were carrying. He reached into his coat. He gave me the folded page, his grandmother's journal entry, the melody transcribed in imprecise and precious handwriting. Keep it, he said. It was always yours. I pressed it against my chest. Come back when it is safe, he said, not dramatically, not with performance. The way a man states a fact he has known across more than one lifetime. I will be here. I walked through the gate. I did not look back. Because I knew that if I turned around and saw his face, I would not be able to keep walking, and I needed to keep walking, for both of us. Han Cheol-soo's arrest came 4 days later. The case Park Siwon's lawyers had been building, quietly, methodically, in the background of everything else, was thorough enough to collapse the Busan alliance entirely. The tabloid retracted its article. My university reversed the suspension 2 months later and sent a formal letter of apology that I read once and set aside. My mother's violin arrived in Lagos before my suspension was lifted, restored so precisely that the repair lines ran through the wood like thin rivers on an old map, visible, yes, but not wrong. Not damage, history, every fracture documented, honored, held in place. The luthier had sent a note that said, some things are not meant to look like they were never broken. Only like they survived. I sat in the flat and held it for a long time before I played it, then I played the melody. In the courtyard below, 3 children were chasing a small dog in circles, their laughter rising in the warm Lagos air. One of them stopped mid-run and looked up toward my window. A small girl, maybe 7 years old. She stood completely still with her head tilted, listening, and the expression on her face was one I recognized from the inside, a door opening. Something asleep sitting up. I kept playing, and I understood not as metaphor, not as poetry, that the melody was still traveling, still finding whoever needed it. Still doing what it had always done. I am back in Seoul now. The cherry blossoms are letting go over the Han River paths, drifting in slow pink spirals, and the city breathes its particular combination of ancient and modern, brutal and tender. Park Siwon is not what the world decided he was. He is something quieter and more complicated, a man who lost something so far back that the loss became the foundation of everything he built above it. Every evening I play in the apartment above the city. He sits by the window with his eyes closed. And I watch that thing happen, that slow, private release, the thing I first saw across a crowded ballroom and could not name. I can name it now. It is the sound of a soul recognizing home. My mother hummed a melody she learned from her mother, who carried it from somewhere she could not name. It crossed oceans and generations and the uncrossable border between one life and the next, and it found the one person alive who needed it most. Music carries memory. Not only the memory of the person playing it, but the memory of everyone who has ever needed it, every grief it has comforted, every silence it has filled. Every soul it has found in the dark and said, I remember you, I have been looking. The heart does not forget what the mind has had no choice but to let go. I lift my bow. The first note settles into the room like something returning to where it belongs. Outside, Seoul glows in the dark, neon and ancient, dangerous and achingly beautiful, exactly like love. Exactly like survival, exactly like something neither of us will ever walk away from again. The melody continues. It always does. Thank you for listening to this story. If it meant something to you, there's more like it here. You're always welcome to come back for more.